Have you ever met someone who made you feel safe at the exact moment you realized you should be afraid? Charlotte Whitmore stood alone in the dark silence of her penthouse office, 48 floors above downtown Chicago, staring through floor-to-ceiling glass at a city that never seemed to sleep. Thousands of lights shimmered below like stars scattered across black water. Traffic moved in slow streams. Neon signs blinked. Somewhere down there, people were heading home. But Charlotte had forgotten what that word even meant. Her phone vibrated against the polished oak desk. Then again, and again. Emails, board members, investors, attorneys. Every notification demanded something from her. Another decision, another signature, another problem only she could solve. She glanced at the screen before turning it face down. For once, she couldn't bring herself to care. The office felt unusually quiet tonight. Almost hollow. The kind of silence that arrives before a storm. Or after one. Charlotte crossed her arms and looked at her reflection in the glass. At 38, she had become one of the most respected CEOs in the country. Financial magazines called her brilliant. Investors called her unstoppable. Employees called her intimidating. Yet none of those words mattered when she found herself standing alone in an office long after midnight, wondering why success felt so much like loneliness. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She didn't turn around immediately. She already knew who it was. Somehow she always knew. The door opened slowly. Malcolm Carter stepped inside, carrying a worn backpack slung over one shoulder. The kind of backpack decorated with small keychains a child would choose. He had probably just come from picking up his daughter after an evening school event. His work jacket looked older than most of the executives working downstairs. His hands carried the marks of years spent fixing things nobody else noticed until they stopped working. Yet somehow, the room felt steadier the moment he entered. Charlotte hated that she noticed. Hated it because it was true. Malcolm paused near the doorway. "You wanted to see me?" he asked quietly. His voice was calm, unhurried, never demanding. Charlotte swallowed. Suddenly the speech she had rehearsed all afternoon felt impossible. She looked away toward the city again. Somewhere behind her, Malcolm waited patiently. He never rushed people. Another thing she had begun noticing far too often. The silence stretched between them. Not awkward, just heavy. The kind of silence that carried things words couldn't. Charlotte closed her eyes briefly. 6 weeks earlier, Malcolm Carter had been nothing more than a maintenance supervisor she occasionally passed in the hallway. Now his presence occupied more space in her thoughts than any merger, acquisition, or quarterly report. And that terrified her. Because every person she had ever allowed close eventually became another loss she carried alone. Her father, former friends, relationships that collapsed under the weight of her career. Everyone left, or she pushed them away first. It was safer that way. It had always been safer that way. Her phone buzzed again. Neither of them looked at it. Finally, Charlotte took a slow breath and spoke without turning around. "You should leave before this gets complicated." The words came out softer than she intended, almost fragile. The city lights reflected in the glass. Behind her, Malcolm remained perfectly still. And for the first time in years, Charlotte Whitmore found herself hoping he wouldn't listen. Malcolm did not answer right away. He simply stood near the door with one hand resting on the strap of his backpack. The city lights reflected across the glass behind Charlotte, turning her silhouette into something distant and untouchable. Most people would have rushed to fill the silence. Most people would have defended themselves, asked questions, demanded explanations. Malcolm never seemed interested in winning conversations. He had spent too many years learning that some people were carrying battles words could not fix. Charlotte waited. Her pulse felt louder than the traffic 48 stories below. Finally, she heard the faint sound of leather shifting as Malcolm adjusted his backpack. "All right," he said gently. "Just 2 words. Nothing more." Charlotte frowned slightly. She had expected confusion, maybe disappointment, perhaps even resistance. Instead, she heard acceptance. Calm acceptance. Somehow that hurt more. Malcolm nodded once toward her back, even though she could not see it. "You should probably get some rest," he added. "You have another board meeting at 8 tomorrow morning." Charlotte stared at the glass. Of course he remembered. She remembered mentioning it 3 days earlier during a conversation that lasted less than 60 seconds. Yet he remembered. The office became quiet again. Malcolm turned toward the door. Then something happened that neither of them expected. Charlotte felt panic. Not dramatic panic. Not the kind that made people run. It was smaller than that. Sharper. like watching a door slowly close while realizing too late that something important was on the other side. The feeling startled her. She had spent years training herself not to depend on anyone. Dependence created disappointment. Expectations created pain. Work was safer. Numbers were safer. Results were safer. People left. They always left. Yet as Malcolm reached for the door handle, she suddenly found herself remembering things she had not intended to remember. The first time she noticed him carrying a small science project through the lobby because his daughter had forgotten it in the car. The way he smiled when talking about her school competition. The afternoon he spent 20 minutes helping an elderly receptionist fix a broken coffee machine, even though it was not part of his job. The fact that every person in the building seemed calmer after speaking with him. Small things. Meaningless things. Except they were not meaningless anymore. Malcolm opened the door. Charlotte closed her eyes briefly. 6 weeks earlier, none of this would have mattered. 6 weeks earlier, he had simply been another employee among hundreds. Back then, she barely noticed the people who kept the building running. Her world existed inside conference rooms and financial reports. Then came a rainy Tuesday evening when an elevator became stuck between floors after most employees had gone home. Charlotte had been inside. So had Malcolm. 42 minutes. That was all. 42 minutes trapped in a metal box while Chicago rain hammered against the building outside. No panic. No complaints. Just conversation. Real conversation. The kind people forgot how to have. He told her about his daughter Lily and her obsession with astronomy. She told him she had not taken a vacation in nearly 4 years. He laughed softly and asked if she was trying to break some kind of record. She actually laughed back. A real laugh. The first one in longer than she cared to admit. The elevator was repaired. The doors opened. Life continued. Yet something had quietly changed. And now, standing alone in the office while Malcolm prepared to leave, Charlotte realized that perhaps the most dangerous thing about kindness was how quietly it entered a person's life before becoming impossible to ignore. The door clicked shut. The sound was quiet, almost invisible, yet it seemed to echo through the entire office. Charlotte remained motionless beside the glass, staring at the reflection of a city she could no longer focus on. Somewhere below, headlights flowed through downtown streets like rivers of white and red. Somewhere above, clouds drifted across the night sky. But inside the office, time felt strangely still. Her phone buzzed again. Then again. She ignored it. For the first time in years, quarterly reports and investor calls felt distant. Her thoughts had already traveled somewhere else. Back to a Saturday morning 3 weeks earlier. She remembered it clearly now. More clearly than she wanted to admit. The company had hosted a community science fair for local schools. Charlotte almost canceled her appearance. She had 3 meetings scheduled and a conference call with investors from New York. Yet her assistant insisted it would be good publicity. So she showed up, smiled for photographs, shook hands, delivered a speech she barely remembered writing. Then she noticed Malcolm standing near one of the student exhibits. He was not looking at the executives or the sponsors. He was kneeling beside a table covered with handmade planets hanging from fishing line. A young girl stood beside him wearing sneakers decorated with tiny silver stars. Lily. Charlotte remembered her name immediately. The little girl was explaining her solar system project to a group of judges. Her voice trembled slightly. She looked nervous. Malcolm never interrupted, never corrected her. He simply listened as though she were presenting the most important discovery in human history. Every few seconds, she glanced toward him. Each time, he offered the same small nod. Nothing dramatic. Just confidence. Borrowed confidence. The kind a parent gives without saying a word. Charlotte remembered standing 20 feet away watching the exchange. Something about it unsettled her. Not because it was extraordinary. Because it was not. It was ordinary. Beautifully ordinary. The sort of moment money could not purchase. The sort of moment she had missed while spending years chasing success. Later that afternoon, she found herself standing near the refreshment table when Lily approached carrying a paper cup of lemonade. "You are the boss lady," Lily had said matter-of-factly. Charlotte laughed despite herself. "I suppose I am." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "My dad says being a boss means taking care of people." Charlotte blinked. "Did he?" "Yes." Lily smiled. "He says the best bosses make everybody feel important." Then the girl wandered off before Charlotte could respond. She remembered standing there with the lemonade suddenly forgotten in her hand. No executive coach had ever explained leadership that simply. No business book had ever reduced it to something so human. The memory lingered long after the event ended. In the weeks that followed, Charlotte began noticing Malcolm everywhere. Not because he was trying to be noticed. Quite the opposite. He blended into the background with effortless ease, holding a door for a delivery driver carrying heavy boxes, remembering the names of security guards everyone else overlooked, leaving a cup of coffee on a receptionist's desk after hearing she had worked a double shift. Small acts, tiny moments, easy to miss. Yet Charlotte kept seeing them. And every time she did, something inside her shifted a little more. Back in the office, she slowly lowered herself into the chair behind her desk. The leather felt cold beneath her. Her eyes drifted toward the empty doorway. She had built a career by recognizing value before others saw it. She could identify opportunity inside spreadsheets and market trends faster than most people in her industry. Yet somehow she had been completely unprepared for the quiet value of a man whose greatest strength was simply making people feel seen. And now, for the first time, Charlotte was beginning to wonder whether the life she spent years building was missing the one thing she needed most. Charlotte arrived at the office before sunrise the next morning. The city outside still wore the pale blue colors of dawn, and most of the building remained quiet except for the distant hum of elevators beginning their daily routine. She carried a cup of coffee she never intended to drink. It sat untouched beside her laptop while emails filled her screen. Numbers, projections, acquisition reports. Normally this was where she felt strongest. Today it felt like noise. Her eyes drifted toward the large windows. The sky beyond them was slowly brightening. Somewhere across the city, Malcolm was probably helping Lily get ready for school. The thought appeared without invitation. That bothered her. Charlotte opened another spreadsheet. Then another. 10 minutes later, she realized she had not absorbed a single word. A soft knock interrupted her concentration. "Come in," she said. Her assistant stepped inside carrying a folder. The investors from Boston moved their meeting to Thursday. Charlotte nodded absent-mindedly. "Fine." Her assistant hesitated. "Also, maintenance requested approval for the community center renovation project." Charlotte finally looked up. Normally such requests would pass through several departments before reaching her desk. Why did this come to me? Because Malcolm Carter submitted the proposal personally. The name landed differently now. Charlotte hated how quickly she noticed it. Her assistant placed the folder down and left. For several seconds, Charlotte simply stared at the cover page. Then she opened it. The proposal itself was straightforward. A neighborhood youth center needed repairs, new lighting, updated classrooms, a safer study area for local students. The budget was modest compared to the company's normal expenditures. Yet attached behind the financial breakdown were handwritten letters from children who used the center after school. Charlotte found herself reading every one. One letter described a teenager who wanted to become an engineer. Another came from a young girl who loved astronomy because it reminded her that the universe was bigger than her problems. Charlotte smiled despite herself. That sounded suspiciously familiar. She reached the final page. At the bottom, Malcolm had added a short note. No dramatic appeal. No attempt to impress anyone. Just a single sentence. These kids deserve a place that reminds them their future matters. Charlotte sat back slowly. Most proposals focused on costs, risks, returns. Malcolm focused on people. That difference stayed with her throughout the morning. Around noon, she left a board meeting early and took the elevator down to the lower floors. She told herself she needed to inspect the renovation site. The excuse sounded reasonable enough, even if she did not fully believe it. The community center occupied part of an older building the company owned several blocks away. When she arrived, volunteers moved supplies through hallways that smelled faintly of fresh paint and sawdust. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. The sound felt strangely foreign after years spent inside executive offices. Then she spotted Malcolm near a classroom doorway. He stood on a ladder replacing a light fixture while speaking with two teenagers about college applications. He listened more than he talked. That seemed to be his gift, making people feel heard. Charlotte remained unnoticed for several moments, long enough to watch him climb down from the ladder and hand a student a folded piece of paper. The boy unfolded it and smiled. Charlotte later learned it was a list of scholarship programs Malcolm had researched on his own time. Not because anyone asked him to, simply because he cared. The realization settled heavily in her chest. Success had introduced her to thousands of impressive people. Brilliant people. Ambitious people. Influential people. Yet standing in that unfinished classroom, watching a tired single father spend his lunch break helping strangers believe in themselves, Charlotte felt something she had not felt in years. Admiration. Real admiration. And that frightened her more than she wanted to admit. That night Charlotte stayed at the office long after everyone else had gone home. The cleaning crews moved quietly through distant hallways. Elevators chimed occasionally. The city glowed beyond the windows like an endless sea of light. Yet none of it held her attention. A photograph sat on her desk. Not a family photo. Not an award. A picture taken during the community center visit earlier that afternoon. One of the volunteers had emailed it to her. She had opened it without thinking. Now she could not stop looking at it. Malcolm stood near a classroom doorway while a group of teenagers gathered around him. Nobody in the picture appeared aware of the camera. That was what made it different. Nobody was performing. Nobody was trying to impress anyone. They were simply sharing a moment. Charlotte leaned back in her chair. For years, she had surrounded herself with people who wanted something. Contracts, promotions, access, influence. She understood that world. It made sense. Every relationship came with expectations attached. Every conversation had an objective. Yet Malcolm seemed untouched by that logic. He gave his time away as though it cost nothing. He listened as though other people's stories mattered. The more Charlotte thought about it, the less she understood it, and the more she admired it. Her phone buzzed. An incoming call from an old friend. She let it ring until it stopped. A few seconds later, a text message appeared. "You disappeared again. Working late?" Charlotte stared at the screen before setting the phone aside. The truth was more complicated. She was not thinking about work at all. That realization unsettled her. For years, her company had been the center of everything. It was where she directed her energy, her focus, her ambition. It never left unexpectedly. It never disappointed her. It never asked her to be vulnerable. People were different. People could walk away. Her gaze drifted toward the dark window. A memory surfaced. 5 years earlier, she had been engaged to a man named Ethan. Intelligent, successful, kind in many ways. Everyone said they were perfect together. Until one evening, he sat across from her at a restaurant and quietly admitted he was tired of competing with her career. He wanted a life that included weekends, family dinners, vacations, things Charlotte never seemed able to prioritize. 3 months later, he moved across the country. She never blamed him, but she never forgot the lesson either. The closer someone stood, the more they could leave. Since then, she had built walls so carefully that most people never realized they existed. Yet Malcolm had somehow walked through those walls without trying. Not through romance. Not through charm. Through consistency. Through kindness. Through 1,000 small moments that quietly earned trust. Charlotte closed her laptop. The office suddenly felt too large. Too empty. She reached for her coat and headed toward the elevator. 45 minutes later, she stopped at a neighborhood grocery store on her way home. She rarely shopped for herself. Usually someone else handled that. Tonight, she wandered the aisles without purpose. Then she heard a familiar voice near the dairy section. "Malcolm." Charlotte froze. Not because she planned to speak to him. Because she was not prepared for the warmth she felt simply hearing him laugh. A moment later, she turned the corner and saw him standing beside Lily as they debated which ice cream flavor to buy. Lily was explaining something with dramatic enthusiasm. Malcolm listened as though it were the most important discussion in America. Charlotte remained hidden behind a shelf for only a second before quietly stepping back. Her heart felt unexpectedly heavy, because in that ordinary moment, she finally understood what frightened her most. It was not losing Malcolm. It was realizing how much she already valued having him in her life. The following week passed with a strange tension Charlotte could not explain. Nothing dramatic happened. No major crisis. No unexpected event. Yet she carried a quiet restlessness into every meeting, every conference call, every late night spent staring at financial reports. It followed her like a shadow. She noticed it most during the moments she expected to see Malcolm and did not. On Tuesday, she found herself glancing toward the lobby while crossing the building. On Wednesday, she caught herself looking toward the maintenance office as she left a meeting. By Thursday, she finally admitted something she had spent days trying to avoid. She was looking for him. The realization arrived with uncomfortable clarity. Charlotte did not like needing things from people. She certainly did not like missing people. Yet every time she saw Malcolm, some part of her seemed to settle. The feeling made no sense. They came from different worlds, different experiences, different expectations. Yet somehow his presence felt familiar in a way she could not explain. Late Thursday afternoon, she stood outside a conference room while executives argued over a merger proposal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Voices rose. Opinions clashed. Numbers filled giant screens mounted on the walls. Charlotte normally excelled in situations like this. Today she felt exhausted. Her attention drifted toward the rain sliding down the windows. Then her phone buzzed. A message from her assistant. Malcolm Carter is here. He wanted your approval on the final renovation permits. Charlotte stared at the screen longer than necessary. Her pulse quickened. That alone irritated her. She replied immediately. Send him up. 10 minutes later, he stood across from her desk, holding a folder. The office suddenly felt smaller. Malcolm offered his usual calm smile. I just need one signature. Charlotte nodded and reached for the paperwork. Their fingers nearly touched as he handed it over. Such a small thing. Yet her chest tightened unexpectedly. She signed the documents quickly. Too quickly. Malcolm noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything. You seem tired, he said. The observation was gentle, not intrusive. Somehow that made it worse. Charlotte looked down at the papers. I am fine. Malcolm remained quiet. He had learned long ago that people often said they were fine when they were anything but. After a moment he nodded. Oh, right. Again, no pressure. No questions. Just acceptance. The same acceptance that somehow made her defenses feel fragile. He turned to leave. Charlotte watched him take 3 steps toward the door before speaking. Malcolm. He stopped and looked back. The concern in his eyes caught her off guard. For a second, she almost told him the truth. That she had barely slept. That she felt lonely in ways success could not solve. That she no longer trusted herself around him because he made her care. Instead, she swallowed the words. Years of habit won the battle. Nothing, she said quietly. Malcolm studied her for a moment. Then he gave a small nod. Take care of yourself, Charlotte. Not Miss Whitmore. Not CEO. Charlotte. The sound of her name in his voice lingered long after he left. That evening she remained alone in the office once again. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Her phone lit up with another invitation to a networking event. She deleted it. An investor requested a private dinner. She declined. Then she noticed something sitting near the edge of her desk. A paper cup. Fresh coffee. Black. Exactly the way she drank it. Beneath it rested a folded note written in careful handwriting. Hope tomorrow feels lighter than today. No signature. None was needed. Charlotte stared at the note for a long time. Then she sat down slowly and closed her eyes. Because in that simple act she recognized the truth she had been running from for weeks. Malcolm had become the place her thoughts returned to when everything else felt heavy. And that realization frightened her more than any business risk she had ever faced. The next evening the city disappeared beneath a curtain of rain. Thick clouds covered the skyline, turning the glass walls of Charlotte's office into dark mirrors. Most employees had already gone home. The executive floor felt unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that made every thought sound louder. Charlotte sat alone at her desk, staring at the folded note Malcolm had left the day before. Hope tomorrow feels lighter than today. She had read those 7 words more times than she cared to admit. They should not have mattered. Yet they did. Somewhere along the way, Malcolm had become more than a familiar face in the building. More than a trusted employee. More than the father of a remarkable little girl. He had become the person whose kindness reached places she had spent years protecting. And that realization refused to leave her alone. A knock came at the door. Her pulse reacted before her mind did. Come in. Malcolm stepped inside carrying a maintenance report. Rainwater dotted the shoulders of his old jacket. He looked tired. Not exhausted. Just the kind of tired that came from balancing work, responsibility, and parenthood. Somehow he still smiled. I wanted to drop this off before heading home. Charlotte nodded. Thank you. Malcolm placed the report on her desk. Neither moved. Neither seemed eager to leave. The silence settled between them once again. Familiar now. Dangerous now. Charlotte stood and walked toward the window. Below them, headlights reflected across rain-soaked streets. Somewhere in the distance a train moved through the city. Everything kept moving forward. Everything except her. She folded her arms tightly. The truth had become impossible to ignore. Every conversation with Malcolm mattered more than it should. Every moment lingered longer than it should. Every small act of kindness left a mark she could not erase. And that terrified her. Because she knew exactly where roads like this could lead. Not because of Malcolm, Because of herself. Because caring always carried risk. Because loss always arrived eventually. Because she had spent years convincing herself she did not need anyone. Behind her, Malcolm remained quietly patient. He never demanded explanations. Never pushed for answers. That made what came next even harder. Charlotte took a slow breath. There is something I need to say. Malcolm waited. Rain tapped softly against the glass. You have become important to me. The words escaped before she could stop them. Honest. Unfiltered. Real. Charlotte closed her eyes briefly. And that is exactly why I think this needs to stop. The room fell completely silent. She continued before courage abandoned her. People always leave, Malcolm. Sometimes because life changes. Sometimes because priorities change. Sometimes because things become complicated. Her voice softened. I built this company because it was the only thing I could count on. I know how to manage businesses. I know how to solve problems. I do not know how to do this. She finally turned to face him. The concern in Malcolm's eyes nearly broke her resolve. I think it would be better if we kept our distance. There it was. The wall. The one she always built when someone got too close. For a moment neither spoke. Charlotte felt her chest tighten painfully. She expected disappointment. Maybe confusion. Maybe silence. Instead, Malcolm looked at her with the same steady kindness he had shown everyone from board members to security guards. The same kindness that had changed everything. Then he smiled softly. Not because he was amused. Because he understood. And somehow that made what came next feel even more important than anything either of them had said before. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the rain. It drifted across the glass in soft patterns, turning the lights of Chicago into blurred streaks of gold and white. Charlotte stood motionless near the window. Malcolm stood a few feet away. Neither rushed to fill the silence. Some moments deserved room to breathe. Malcolm lowered his eyes briefly before looking back at her. There was no frustration in his expression. No disappointment. No attempt to argue. Only understanding. The kind of understanding that comes from someone who has carried his own share of loss. Then he spoke. His voice was quiet enough that Charlotte almost missed the first words. Charlotte, I was never afraid of complicated. She felt her breath catch. Malcolm smiled gently. I have been a single father for 9 years. I have worked 2 jobs at the same time. I have stayed up all night helping Lily finish school projects and still shown up for work at 6 in the morning. A faint laugh escaped him. Life has never been simple. Charlotte looked away quickly. The emotion building inside her felt dangerous. Malcolm continued. What scares me is something else. The office seemed impossibly still. Seeing good people carry everything alone because they think they have to. The words landed softly. Yet somehow they hit harder than any accusation ever could. Charlotte stared at the city lights below. Her vision blurred for a second. She blinked and forced herself to focus. Malcolm was not criticizing her. That was what made it so difficult. He was simply seeing her. Really seeing her. The exhausted executive who never stopped working. The daughter who lost her father too early. The woman who spent years convincing herself she did not need anyone. Malcolm took a slow breath. You know what I noticed the first time we got stuck in that elevator? Charlotte did not answer. He smiled faintly. You spent 42 minutes worrying about everyone else. The employees waiting upstairs. The clients. The meetings. He shook his head. Not once did you worry about yourself. Charlotte swallowed hard. She remembered that day. She remembered every minute of it. Malcolm looked toward the rain-covered window. You take care of everyone around you. His voice softened even more. I just wish someone was taking care of you too. The room became painfully quiet. Charlotte felt something inside her begin to crack. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Slowly. Like ice breaking at the end of a long winter. For years people had admired her success. Respected her position. Needed her decisions. Very few had ever worried about her. Very few had looked beyond the title and seen the person carrying it. Malcolm never seemed interested in the title. That was the problem. Or perhaps it was the gift. Charlotte turned away from him and stared at the dark reflection in the glass. She could feel tears threatening. She hated crying. Hated it. Tears felt like surrender. Weakness. Loss of control. Yet tonight felt different. Tonight she was not grieving failure. She was grieving the realization that she had spent so many years protecting herself that she almost pushed away one of the few genuinely good people she had ever known. Behind her, Malcolm said nothing more. He did not move closer. Did not pressure her. Did not ask for anything. He simply stood there. Present. Steady. The same way he always had. Charlotte pressed her fingertips lightly against the cool glass. A single tear escaped before she could stop it. Then another. She closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to stop pretending she was unbreakable. And somehow, standing in the quiet presence of a man who expected nothing from her, she felt stronger than she had in a very long time. The rain had softened by the time Malcolm finally turned toward the door. Neither of them spoke immediately. Some conversations changed things too deeply for words to keep up. Charlotte remained near the window, her eyes fixed on the city below, though she was no longer seeing the traffic or the lights. She was seeing years. Years spent building walls. Years spent believing strength meant carrying everything alone. Years spent confusing independence with isolation. Behind her, Malcolm picked up the maintenance report he had nearly forgotten. His movements remained calm, unhurried, exactly as they had always been. That steadiness suddenly felt precious. The sound of his footsteps moving toward the exit stirred something inside Charlotte. A familiar feeling. The same feeling she experienced in the grocery store. The same feeling she felt every time he walked away. Loss. Not actual loss. The possibility of it. And for the first time, she was tired of letting fear make decisions for her. Malcolm. His name escaped before she could reconsider. He stopped immediately and turned back. Charlotte took a slow breath. The words felt unfamiliar. Vulnerable. Honest. Stay for a minute. Malcolm nodded once and waited. No questions. No pressure. Just patience. Charlotte laughed softly through the remnants of tears she had tried so hard to hide. You know what is strange? Malcolm raised an eyebrow slightly. What? She looked down at the floor before answering. I spent most of my life believing successful people had everything figured out. A faint smile touched her lips. Then I became one. Malcolm smiled. And Charlotte shook her head. And it turns out nobody knows what they are doing. The quiet laugh that followed belonged to both of them. Small. Genuine. Human. The tension that had filled the room all evening seemed to loosen. Not disappear. Just soften. Charlotte walked back toward her desk and sat down. For the first time in years, she ignored the stack of reports waiting for her attention. They could wait until morning. The company would survive. The world would keep turning. Malcolm sat in one of the chairs across from her desk. The same chair executives usually occupied while discussing contracts worth millions of dollars. Somehow this conversation felt more important than any of them. They talked for nearly an hour. About Lily's upcoming science competition. About the community center renovation. About Charlotte's father and how he used to bring her hot chocolate during late nights at the office when she was a teenager. No presentations. No negotiations. No agendas. Just two people sharing pieces of their lives. When the clock finally crept past 10 o'clock, Malcolm stood. Lily is probably wondering why I am late. Charlotte smiled. Then you should go. This time the words carried no fear. Malcolm picked up his backpack. Before leaving, he paused beside the door. For what it is worth, he said quietly, you do not have to carry everything by yourself. Charlotte felt emotion rise again, but this time she did not fight it. She simply nodded. I am starting to learn that. Malcolm smiled. Then he left. The door closed softly behind him. Charlotte remained seated in the silence. Yet the office no longer felt empty. The city still glowed beyond the glass. Her phone still waited with unanswered messages. Tomorrow would still bring responsibilities and challenges. But something had changed. Not in the company. In her. For years Charlotte believed strength meant never needing anyone. Tonight she discovered a different kind of strength. The courage to let someone matter. The courage to trust kindness when it arrived. And somewhere below, a single father drove home through the rain to his daughter, completely unaware that he had done something far greater than fix broken buildings. He had quietly restored a piece of someone's faith in people. And for the first time in a very long time, Charlotte Whitmore felt less alone.